Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Well, welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're going to talk about negative self-talk.
I think just about everyone has struggled with this at some point. Can I say everyone in totality? No, there are those offshoots, but we all have those moments where we aren't so kind to ourselves.
But those who don't engage in it are almost diagnosed one itself.
It's
It's a natural human process. When you think
100%.
about from an evolutionary perspective, our brain focuses on negative.
Mhm.
I'd rather assume that things that are different are negative. When we overgeneralize, I'd rather just assume that most of these lions are dangerous. Like, it's protective.
It is, keeps us alive. If I focused on the good while a bear's coming at me, I would probably die.
Yeah.
So I need to focus on the threats in order to survive.
And negative self-talk isn't necessarily bad per se. In small amounts where it may motivate you to do something.
Mhm.
It's when it gets toxic. It's when it becomes the main narrative in our minds. And there's not a balance with positive self-talk, which we know is very, very important to success, especially like when you look at athletes. It's a big predictor of success.
Absolutely. And I ask people, one of my central questions around this for people is, if a friend talked to you the way you do, would you still be friends with them? Or would you ever talk to your child that way? The answer is no, you shouldn't be doing it, right? We don't get a free pass just because it's ourself.
And that's what scares me a little bit when I hear people talk to their loved one in a way, because I know that they talk to themselves worse. I'm like, oh my goodness.
But it's also a reflection of the dialogue inside. If I can look at my partner and say, you're an asshole, you're a piece of shit,
Mhm.
I've made that a permissive thing to say. And like you said, chances are I'm more permissive of even worse for myself. Just so sad.
Yeah, and it's hard because what keeps people doing that is they
Mhm.
believe those thoughts are valid,
Mhm.
or they have a fear that if they don't do that, they're not going to achieve something.
Sure.
But the caveat or problem with that, I guess I should say, is you are more likely to paralyze yourself with negative self-talk.
Absolutely.
So even though we feel like we're motivating ourselves, often we become paralyzed and we don't believe in ourselves. And over time, it's corrosive to our self-worth, big time. It leads to depression, it leads to anxiety.
Even isolation.
Yep.
And there's a difference between what you're saying, like the healthy parts of negative self-talk, and unhealthy. So saying like, man, I wish I had done that differently, or, ooh, that didn't feel good for me, I wanted to respond differently. That's one way. If I'm sitting there saying, I'm a piece of shit, I'm fat, I'm gross, I'm dumb, that's very different, right? Shame isn't actually helpful. We know that. Shame is debilitating.
Yeah.
So when our self-talk moves into shame, that's when it's officially in that toxic space. If it's, okay, this isn't my favorite moment in myself and I need to do better, and we move through it and we don't continue that negative self-talk, that's okay.
Yes, when you're beating yourself up continually.
Yeah.
And what you're really talking about is we're kind of neutralizing the talk, because there's like the very, negative, corrosive language, like you said, like, I'm a piece of shit, or I'm no good, I suck at this, I'll never be able to do this.
Like impacts our core, right?
Yeah, and especially that I language, that first person language.
Yeah.
Versus, I wish I would have done that better. I'm really not happy with how I handled that. It's negative self-talk, but it's also very much neutralized, or the language is neutral. So potentially less corrosive over time.
Mhm. It's hard. There are moments when we might get sucked into this trap, especially if there's evidence to support it. So what we know in psychology is that we have something called confirmation bias, where I will look for things to affirm my bias or to confirm it. And when we start to get into this cycle, think of it like a spiral. The further down you go, the more I'm going to find confirmation bias. So if I say, okay, big one I hear from women, I'm fat, I'm gross. Okay, I'm going to start looking at all the skinnier people around me. I'm going to start looking at that ideal size 0, American standard, whatever it might be. Instead of looking at the average American female is actually a size 12. Instead of looking at, okay, what else is great about me, or what has brought my body here, or how can I love my body into a healthier place, whatever it might be. We find those things that confirm our bias and our negative self-talk. And that just further deepens that self-talk of, I knew it. I knew I was stupid. I knew I'd make a mistake. I knew I wasn't attractive because that person ghosted me, whatever. we will find that. We also surround ourselves with people who start to affirm that. If I feel like a piece of shit, I'm going to attract people who either feel the same way about themselves or who reinforce that within me.
And what you're talking about in terms of awareness,
Yeah,
is a lot of us don't even know we're aware that we're doing this, that our standard, our negative self-talk is not realistic. Like I said earlier, it's one of the factors of that maintains it, is that we think it's valid. And it's because we're not aware of actually how unrealistic those thoughts are. But what you said, it also makes me think of, because this is what I ask questions a lot, or clients a lot. I ask these questions is, where do you think that narrative came from?
Excellent question.
Where do you think that voice came from? Often it's like a parent. It can be
partner.
It could be a partner, a friend. You see it a lot with people who are bullied.
Oh yeah.
That narrative has come, even if their parents were amazing and they never had that narrative at all from them or any family, but they got bullied, all of a sudden there's this question about who we are.
And the paradox of bullying is the bully is often feeling the same things about themselves too.
Yeah.
They're acting out their own negative self-talk onto someone else.
Oh, absolutely. And what I love about identifying the voice of who it was, it helps depersonalize it from you. So it makes you see it as like, oh, this isn't my voice. And if it's not my voice, I can question how true or not true it is more readily, because a lot of people, we, as us too, put weight on the voice inside our head.
Oh yeah.
Oh, because I thought it must be true.
Right.
No. So if you're like, oh, that's my mom's voice. Like some clients are like, oh crap, my mom's coming into this session right now. And they're like, get weirded out about that. But it really helps because it interrupts it as like, oh, this is not my voice. This is not my narrative, which is, I think, a really important first step for some to help reauthor that narrative and question it.
And that can be hard for some, right? If it is my mom's voice, but I feel familial loyalty to her.
Yeah.
How do I question it? And that's part of where therapy can come in. But also starting to hold the dynamic of my mom can have both good parts and not good parts, right? She can be both loving, supportive, and say things that hurt my self-worth. That's important because when I can start to see her as multifaceted, I can start to see me as multifaceted. I can both make mistakes and be a good human. I can be attractive in these ways and wish these ways were different. We can be, I talk about the and language, right? We can be two things at once. And that is important in helping to conquer negative self-talk too, because it adds dimension, it adds depth, rather than just all these negative things. What are the good things about me? What are the things that I do enjoy, that the people around me enjoy?
And that's a hard thing to do because naturally our brain, again, is geared towards negative. I always kind of joke with clients is everything that is supposed to be healthy for us is going against the grain of what our nature is.
It's so true.
The other thing that we're kind of talking about, there's a trend, right? You talked about, would you talk to a friend that way?
And your child, that one really hits with parents.
Yeah. Would you talk to your child that way? Or the idea of whose voice that is. Both of those are looking at externalizing this voice from you.
Yeah.
Or seeing its impact external to you to really make question like the helpfulness of it. Because a lot of our negative self-talk falls under unhelpful thinking styles, which there's several of them, right? There's the black or white thinking, there's overgeneralizing,
catastrophic thinking, sure.
Jumping to conclusions, shoulds, there's a lot of that. And so if we're able to catch that and recognize that it falls under unhelpful thinking styles, that too can serve as a way to interrupt it of, oh crap, I'm just jumping to conclusions right now, or I'm labeling someone, or I'm shooting on myself. That's a big one. I should have, coulda, woulda, which is unhelpful. The shoulda, woulda, coulda.
And if it's every once in a while, like if you're like, man, I wish I'd handled that different, that's one thing. If I am living by a constant narrative of the things I fail at, the things I'm not good at, the things that I'm disappointed in myself for, the things that my best friend does better, looks better, is better, that is really toxic. As part of this negative self-talk, you may think, well, that doesn't matter because it just impacts me. And we know that's false, right? The self-talk I carry isn't just about me, because I show that in front of my kids. The way I look at myself, pull at my clothes, interact, my kids see it. It also changes the way I want to interact with my partner. Yeah. Do I want to be intimate and close to him? Do I want to be vulnerable, or am I starting to push him away?
Yeah, and I'm glad you're bringing it to this relational thing, because when we read about self-talk, it often really goes into depth about our own mental health and well-being. And a few talk about relationships, but more in depth, like even on a periphery level, even if you're not negative self-talk does not come out and they don't hear it, how that makes you feel then influences your presence in those
Oh,
relationships.
yeah.
I see it a lot in sex with
Mhm.
couples, especially if somebody's negative self-talk is around their image
Oh, yeah.
or performance. There's a lot of performance anxiety when it comes to that.
Mhm.
So you see it affect the relationship in that way. Or if somebody, I've seen it so bad to where they'll shut down for days because
Mhm.
they're in this kind of cycle and this hole of beating themselves up and just so, regretful and shameful about whatever they did that they're not present at all. And then the other partner has to take over parenting and all these tasks, and it leads to burnout.
Work.
And they also feel helpless. Like, how do I get my partner out of this?
Mhm.
So it doesn't just affect us individually. And if you think about that impacting relationships, now the relationships eroding, that's just another stressor.
Right. And then that can be that confirmation bias. I
Yep.
knew my partner didn't like me. Now they're mad at me.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it's my fault. I knew I'm a piece of shit. I should pull away from them
Yep.
even more.
I'm a failure.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. And
Well,
it creates even this eggshell dynamic, right? Where my partner sees I'm suffering because I'm putting myself down. So then my partner feels like they can't give me feedback anymore. And we both start to shut down. What happens when I see my partner shut down? I'm validated that I'm a piece of shit. And it just becomes this really toxic, deep cycle that, yes, does impact the self. And it impacts the whole system, your work, your faith, your kids, your family, your partnership. It doesn't matter.
yeah,
Impacts the whole system.
because of how you're interacting with it, which
Sure.
is influenced by the mood and the place that you've put yourself in through negative self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the tough part to see, because people think it's helpful. They
Mm-hmm.
think, well, I'm just well, and especially if they grew up with this narrative.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
my parents said, like, I need to, like, my dad always did this to me. This is what our coach always did to us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is what motivated us. Or in the military, this is what they did in boot camp, like literally. And it's
Believe
like,
it.
well, there must be some merit to it. Like you said, confirmation bias. So then we put a lot of weight to that. And it's tough to get out of if you're not aware of it. And so if you're listening to this episode, question yourself. If you ever, like, for example, someone has said that you're harsh on yourself, like, that's a really good sign to reflect on yourself.
Mm-hmm. Or you're being critical. If you're
Yeah.
the person that says, I'm sorry every 5 minutes, this is you, right? We
I mean,
all
this is
have those
all of us,
people
yeah.
of, I do something and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. For what? Right?
I wish you would say that more.
I know. Such an asshole. Just ask my husband. It's really bad. But I hope is like everyone listening, take a moment to reflect. Even over the next 24 hours, pay attention to how you talk to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If there are sentences coming into your brain or out
Journal
of your mouth that you would cringe if someone said that to your kiddo, your friend, your partner, your mother, that is a sign we've got some work to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And sometimes we don't notice it happening. Sometimes we do know it's happening and feel helpless to change it or feel like it's valid. So why would I want to change it?
Or I deserve this.
Right?
Why did you deserve this? Well, because the parents also thought they deserved it, or the bullies, or somebody.
Or the partner, right? Go back to what I
Yeah.
was saying earlier of we seek out, we attract people, right? Law of attraction here. If I am someone who's really healthy, know my boundaries, know my worth, I'm going to attract people who also kind of live in that realm because I'm not going to put up with the bullshit.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about unconscious level attract, right?
Oh, yes.
This isn't. Yeah.
Yes. So I naturally select out people that kind of cross my boundaries. If I'm someone who maybe has an unhealthier thinking style or lower self-worth, I'm going to attract people who feed on that. And that can be really hard too, because now we're attracting the people that affirm that narrative. If I feel like a piece of shit, I'm going to attract a partner who makes me feel like a piece of shit.
Or also feels up. And when you're
Yes.
talking about that, you're talking about this earlier in terms of the
Mhm.
relationship. My mind went to the early relationships where they're forming
Yeah.
and we're in the honeymoon phase, or even we're kind of dating and trying to figure out if we like somebody.
Mhm.
This becomes something that's not attractive when
Mhm.
that insecurity, because this again corrodes our self-esteem and self-worth, and that doesn't necessarily put us, like, in an unconscious way, in a position to where people are perceiving our being confident.
Yeah.
It's more like, oh, they're insecure, and
That can be challenging in any relationship, any friendship. So what do we do about it? First is recognizing it. So to our
well,
question,
because I do want to make a
recognizing
comment.
it. Yeah.
I want to make a comment real quick. We talk about sex again. That's not attractive for the other partner either.
Fair.
So you talk about confirming bias. Well, if our partner's beating themselves up and they're beating themselves up, they don't feel attractive.
Mhm.
That's not attractive to other partner. And so that decreases kind of intimacy and then confirms our bias. So
fair point. It's tough. This cycle to break it is really tough, especially if both of the partners are in it together. Because as I'm trying to improve, say, my positivity, positivity of self, positivity of situation, if my partner is still continuing to breathe the negative into my space, that becomes near impossible to break. Sometimes I have to choose space. This is part of what to do with it. Sometimes I have to choose space from people that hold me in that narrative. That may include parents. That may include your partner, your friends. If they want to hold you in this one down position or want to affirm the things you're most struggling with, it may be time to consider what space looks like or boundaries look like.
Or if you even want them in your life to the extent that you have them now.
Yeah.
And this takes you first questioning.
Oh, absolutely.
Your negative self-talk. And if you're kind of on a journey to be positive and interrupt that negative self-talk, but you find certain individuals or even places or situations elicit that or exacerbate that more, absolutely think about the boundaries you have with that.
What are some other things you encourage clients to do?
So there is research that talks about those who talk in first person are less effective with the negative self-talk than those who talk in like second or third person. So naming it, labeling it, talking about it as something separate than yourself. I know literally some clients will literally tell the negative self-talk as another person to fuck off.
Like, another seat in the room.
And it helps kind of take it away. Again, as I said before, take the importance and weight that we put on the voice when we externalize it to that extent. So getting away from the I language, I'm a piece of shit or that, or so when you're labeling it, you're like, wow, like you're not a good person. Like, how does that land? Or I'm not a good person versus you're not a good person.
That's real. I even talk to people. I just lost my train of thought. My turn, Greg.
don't go into negative self-talk about losing.
It'll come back to me.
Another one that's very, because there are ways to do this that are effective. So one is changing the language. We talked about before. So changing the language from first person to maybe second or third. The other was that you mentioned, which is wow, there's my turn.
Oh, I got mine. Here it is. When you externalize it, we can think of our behavior. Sometimes it's not great. That is okay, right? I can say my behavior was bad. It's when it turns to self that it's problematic. I am bad versus my behavior is bad. Same for our kids. A kiddo can have bad behavior. It doesn't make them a bad kid. This is that slight change in language that you're speaking to that can be really big, right? My behavior wasn't my favorite. I didn't like my behavior. My behavior was unkind. That can help externalize it from I am unkind, I am mean, I am bad.
And now I got mine.
You're
so
welcome.
What you talked about earlier, neutral language. So instead of getting to that really heavy negative language, neutralize it. I'm not doing a good job. I'm not happy with how I handled that. Or if you label it, right? Like whatever you label it.
Right.
I don't want to label a name because I don't want people to like, why'd you use my name? But if you had some name, you're like, why, you're just not doing really good right now. So neutral language versus you're a piece of shit, or I can't believe you do this, you're a failure. Those are the strong language that I typically hear with clients.
Oh yeah. Routinely. But just because it's common doesn't mean it's okay.
Yeah. The other one, and we've talked about in previous sessions as a intervention, is cognitive behavioral therapy. One of the ones that I like is the thought log. So you kind of identify the situation, like what happened or who was it? And then what were your initial thoughts about that? I'm not good enough. I failed. I let them down. I'm a piece of shit. And then identify the emotions, not good enough, or like sad, depressed, hopeless. And then you write down, because writing down, you encode better than trying to remember it.
Handwriting.
Yeah. And you think about more adaptive responses, more balanced thinking. So as we said before, it's more natural to find the negative because that's protective. But as you can see on when they're at higher levels, it's not healthy. So do the opposite. What are evidence that you are a good person, that you didn't fail them?
Or at minimum neutral. Sometimes finding the positive can be really difficult. So at minimum, finding the neutral space of that. We're all human.
We're all human. Yeah, exactly. Or like, the person that I'm afraid of failing, that they've also let me down and I still love them. So whatever it is we're finding, and we're continually remind ourselves, and that takes energy, right? Our brain doesn't naturally do that. Its
Yeah.
main goal is to conserve caloric expenditure. And so I'd rather take shortcuts in the negative direction for survival.
100%.
So now we have to expend energy to condition more adaptive responses. And over time, it gets better and it gets better. And you start using this more adaptive thinking. They become more readily available. Even if those negative self-talk still come up, you're able to interrupt it more readily.
On the vein of, I want to say positive, but I don't necessarily know if it's positivity, is compassion. How can I, when we've had episodes on this of self-compassion, how do I turn towards self-compassion, right?
Yeah.
How do I turn towards, I made a mistake, but I'm human, or I made a mistake and I will move through this. Or like I talk to moms, moms are kind of my clinical focus. And often it's about body image. So they talk about their tummies not being tight anymore or whatever. Reframing it with compassion of that tummy grew some babies. How incredible is that? Or, okay, maybe I don't love this part of myself. How do I still give myself a hug? How do I still speak in kindness just like I would my child?
Yeah.
And how do I focus on the things I do love? Right?
Yeah.
Just because I don't love this one part doesn't mean I have to hate the whole thing.
Keyword there, parts.
Yes.
And what you were kind of alluding, well, you did allude to when we talked about the language of labeling the behavior rather than see it as a personality deficit or attacking your own personality and be like,
Worth.
I don't, or worth. It's more of, oh, I don't like how I engaged in this. So same thing here. Right.
And it's hard to know. Greg and I struggle with this too. Even clinicians who are deeply seasoned, who know better, know different, are giving these tools. Does it mean I utilize them all the time? No. There are seasons in my life that are really hard.
And these are coming from us who also see therapists as clients.
100%.
Who also engage in this.
And who see our own, well, I'll speak for myself, who I also see my own therapist.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah. The human quality doesn't end. So if your goal is to never talk negatively about yourself again, it's not going to happen. No. Right? Human quality is going to be there with you until the day you die. And if we can accept that, but try to learn from it, try to grow, try to identify when it's slipping, that's where we want to go, not towards perfection. If you're going towards perfection on this, that self-narrative of I'm a failure, whatever it might be, is going to be reinforced.
And I also find, like, say, for example, I'm a failure, that language. So we work with that. We use the third person, like, label, name. The other thing that I like to dissect is, why does failing have so much weight to you?
Amen.
So then you find out where their narrative is about failing. Oh, well, failing means that I'm going to amount to nothing. Where'd you hear that? My parents. So then you have to dissect that narrative that kind of leads to that fear of failing. So it gets complex. So I definitely suggest going to seek a professional who can really help you break this down and help you alongside you explore that and find new ways to reauthor that. And because if you think about a lot of the narratives we have, they start early.
Oh, yeah.
And we have a very young, small brain. We don't have the prefrontal cortex capacity to critically think about why these things are being said to us or not. So we typically take them in and we make meaning of them, and they typically are not healthy.
And then the people we trust, our parents.
Yeah. Or the popular kid at school. Well, they must know better. They're popular. And they said that I'm ugly or fat or, whatever.
And we trust those sources, especially when we're young. And it becomes this pervasive, deep narrative. I love what you're saying about questioning kind of where it comes from and what it means. Another example of that, because I know negative self-talk often revolves around body image, is I'm fat. Okay. And therefore what?
Yeah.
And I'll hear people say, therefore it means I am lazy. I'm gluttonous. I am less capable. People perceive me as all these things. People perceive me as less attractive. And it's not just about the extra adipose fat, right? If we break it down to a biological level, that's all it is. But the meaning that we attribute to it goes way beyond that.
Yeah.
And if we can explore that and work through those pieces, it can be incredibly powerful.
And what you're hitting on too is the power that society has on exacerbating these negative self-talk.
Oh, yeah.
Because we talked about parent and a friend, a bully, but now let's talk about culture as a whole pushing this narrative and meaning making. It's very hard to break. I mean, this is work. I mean, again, we still struggle with this. It's a constant battle. There isn't you're succeeding this. It's more of you're doing good at this right now because you're making sure and you're very intentional about using positive language, or at least more adaptive language for yourself.
And it creeps in some like covert ways. So with advertising and body image that's displayed there, and how we need to fix our wrinkles, we need to fix this, we need to fix all the things. It can show up in parenting groups. I tell people the worst shame is mom shame. Moms hate being shamed, but yet they dole it out with complete veracity. Like it just, and it shows up in, I think I'm an okay mom. Oh, but this group says I'm not supposed to formulate.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that my kid was supposed to have this thing, or that co-sleeping is bad, or I'm a terrible mother. Oh my gosh. And it starts to really reinforce that narrative, because you go on these groups and moms decimate each other with their words. And then it starts to inform ourselves.
Can I digress into breaking that down of why people do that?
Oh, sure.
I mean, I have my own hypothesis of why this happens. And I want to do this to provide an adaptive thought if you're experiencing
Absolutely.
this. Yours and the general you of people listening. So what would be the function or benefit for us telling someone else they're doing something wrong and they should do it another way?
To me, it's power and control. If I am lacking power and control in one way, I'm going to find it in another. I'm going to be a keyboard troll.
Yeah.
Because I don't have it at home with my screaming baby who can't be consoled by the things I'm doing.
Yeah.
Duly, I feel like a piece of shit because I have a screaming baby at home who's not being consoled.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go take it out on these other women, other partners.
Yeah.
Now I feel powerful and control. Now I have an audience who's listening to me and revering me as someone who's smart or great. And now I feel
even though they don't feel that way because they're engaged in negative self-talk.
100%.
Yeah.
And now I feel, and that's what I was going to say, now I feel less alone because now they feel like a piece of shit and I feel like a piece of shit. It's not just me.
Yeah, and I think that's a big one in terms of if we can view other people's comments and criticisms as probably their own, that helps us not absorb it as much. The other one that I'm thinking of is cognitive dissonance. So, for example, if somebody doesn't feel comfortable and they're continually not confident in how they're questioning things, if we push other people to engage in what we're doing, we feel more comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Because now I feel like I can defend myself.
I think about it in the religion. When someone believes something different than you, it can cause some people dissonance. And we see that when we think about, after the 9/11, the Muslim verse, people were like, oh, different, dangerous, bad.
Right.
But they didn't break it down and they push themselves away from it. And they kind of convince people that their way is right because they feel comfortable in their way. So
absolutely,
if I try to convince and criticize other people into believing and going along with what I do, then I feel more comfortable about my way of life. So people are afraid of dissonance, which goes to people suck at distress tolerance, including
100%.
So those are a couple ways to think about when other people are trying to steer your narrative and you're questioning it. Try to look at the source and look at what that person might be going through. And
empathy.
Yeah.
It's hard to look at the bully with empathy. It's hard to look at someone who's mean and cruel with empathy, including ourselves, right? If I'm mean and cruel to myself, it's really hard to look at myself with empathy. But that's what I try to teach my kids, right? If someone honks at us in traffic, if someone says something stupid, because they do, I will turn to my daughter and say, what do you think could have happened to them today that made their feelings sad to where they felt like they had to do that? What do you think led to them feeling angry enough to be?
You're much nicer than me. I'm just
this is something I've been working on for 7 years. Okay.
so I'm in an early phase of that. And if somebody says something like, oh, they just hate life, they're a piece of shit. You're very nice. You're like, they must be having a difficult time and having compassion. I'm like, fuck them.
In my best self, that's what I'm doing.
Yes.
Is it my constant self? No. That gets a little bit easier as your son starts to move into like preschool. You have to start engaging that because there's a lot of punks.
Yeah.
And instead of being like, hey, Susie, you should just punch him in the face, we have to give them something else to consider.
Yeah. We do have our best selves where we're engaging in this, but also want to let you know we're human and
days I get pissed and there are days I react and that's true. Or that I pick at my body or pick at myself and my kids see it.
Yeah.
I tell people negative self-talk. If anyone who knows me knows my body image is my most difficult self-talk source. especially post kids, like a
Mhm.
whole host of anyway. My daughters think it's hilarious to come up because my belly's stretched out to
Mm.
come up and jiggle my tummy. And inside, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so gross. How could they do that? They think I'm gross. To them, they think it's hilarious. And they think
Yeah.
this is mommy's squishy body. And my daughter, a couple of weeks ago, saw me and she said, do you want to know my favorite parts of your body? And I said, yes. And for some people, it's going to be alarming because she used anatomical language.
Mhm.
She said, your boobs, your vagina, and your belly. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, your vagina gave me birth, your boobs gave me milk, and your belly grew me.
Hmm.
I love those 3 parts of your body. Gets me turned up even as I talk about it.
Aw.
Because those are the things I criticize myself for.
Yeah.
And to her, ooh, it gets me. To
Yeah.
her, she doesn't see it with judgment. She sees it with gratitude, with beauty, with wonder, with fun,
Mhm.
right? It's fun to them to play on my tummy. And so checking my negative self-talk of like, oh my God, my kids must think I'm fat,
Mhm.
to, oh, my kids actually love it. They have no
Yeah.
judgment. I instill the judgment, not them.
What I love about you, and I appreciate you sharing this,
Mhm.
because this happens a lot in when I working with clients, is that they have the negative self-talk.
Oh yeah.
They don't have control over how people act and react. So like your kids are innocently doing something that elicits that negative self-talk.
hmm
And you'll see parents discipline their kids because of it brought up that discomfort for them.
Or they'll say, honey, like my husband's inclination, don't talk about mom's belly. That's starting to instill a message of there's something to be shamed.
Yeah. And so
Mhm.
that might elicit a response.
Yeah,
And that response is influenced by the negative self-talk that led to the insecurity
absolutely.
or continues to exacerbate that insecurity. And so it affects, this is a good example. And I don't know how you're responding, but there are clients that I have that will respond negatively.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and then the kids are like, what did I do wrong? Or they don't
They don't
understand.
get it.
They don't understand why mom's mad or dad's mad or whoever.
But now
Um,
I've enforced a message of
yeah.
I'm ashamed of my body. You should be ashamed of my body. And if your body ever looks like this, you should feel ashamed too.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
So I got a fun question to kind of wrap things up.
Yeah.
From Inside Out, the
Oh my gosh, I
cartoon.
love it. And there's a second one coming out, and I'm so
I
excited
know.
because I introduce anxiety and some different ones. Oh, anyway.
So who would the
Stoked.
negative self-talk be?
Ooh, fear. I often think of fear as one.
Anxiety,
Anger.
depression.
Anxiety's in the new one.
Oh,
Ooh, yeah. Have you seen the
I've
first
seen
one?
the first, yeah.
Oh, the next one has like anxiety and envy and some big ones that play a big part in negative
Yeah.
self-talk, but it's not out yet.
It's-
Maybe
it-
it is out, but it's not on Disney Plus. I digress.
yeah. But I think what's interesting is I was thinking about this when we were
Yeah.
preparing to do this episode, and I was like, what part would it be? And to me, I feel like it's encompassed in depression and fear and anxiety and anger.
Anger.
It can come out in any of those things. And actually, they show or they see people who are depressed or anxious engage in negative self-talk
Oh, yeah.
more. And I think it's cyclical. We engage
Mhm.
in it, it can lead to depression, anxiety, but it can also depression, anxiety can also lead to anxiety, and
100%.
it's this cycle. So
It's a hard struggle to overcome. It is, no one is immune to this. Well, mostly no one.
mhm.
I say, excuse me, I say mostly because the only time I really see this not impacting someone is who has sociopathic tendencies. Outside of that, even someone who's narcissistic, they have insecurities.
They're very deep and they're
It's
complete
actually one of the most insecure conditions we know,
unaware. Yeah.
which is fascinating.
And
It's a sidebar.
that's one theory of narcissism. And it's, yeah, absolutely.
But that shows that the vast majority of the world's population, not just the US, the world's population struggles with this. Some cultures, some countries are worse than others. Some have better mental health support. Some are more body positive, sex positive, you name it. And that can help buffer, but this still shows up in different ways in different cultures.
Yeah. And it makes me think of what you said earlier about then what, especially with body image.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, why, like a lot of the negative self-talk, because we have something to compare to.
Yeah.
So what does it mean if you failed? Going back to like, well, what did it mean to your family? But what does it mean that, you don't have the best body? Or, a lot of times it comes back to status.
Oh, yeah.
Amongst culture, I think status is a big one.
Mhm.
So thinking about where that comes from and why is that so important to you, that you have to beat yourself up on it.
And how can I get support? No one, hear my words, no one deserves to feel like a piece of shit. No one. Not even the most cruel of humans to me. I believe in human quality.
Ooh, that's a tough
Deserve,
one. That's
I
tough.
know, deserve to feel like a piece of shit.
You're more compassionate than me.
I like to believe so. I mean, but in any case, if you're listening, you deserve to feel good. You deserve to love
Yeah.
parts of yourself. You deserve to hold yourself in worth and esteem. And if you struggle with that, please get support. Reach out to a therapist, talk to some supportive friends, whatever you've got to do. Clean up your social media. Get rid of the ones that make you feel like a piece of shit.
Mhm.
Get rid of the pages you follow, the friends you follow, whatever that make you feel small.
Let's get rid of social media, please.
Okay, but I keep up with my family that way. But do the cleanup. You deserve to feel good.
Yeah. And I genuinely believe that too, in the sense that those who are not the greatest human beings, negative self-talk is probably a big part of where they're at. Whether that's defined that way for them or it was a narrative from their parents that weren't so great.
Mhm. This is, again, a tough one. And if anyone has any questions or needs resources, please feel free to reach out or send us topic suggestions for future episodes at Relationships Inside Out. But we thank you for joining today as we talked about negative self talk, and we look forward to chatting more.
Thanks.